Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this hastily rescheduled talk by Nicholas Hahn on exponential disruption. My name is Shiv Malik. I'm going to be the moderator for this session. And welcome to the second of the 15 by 15 talks by the OECD. It's a new format for them. It's fast-paced. It's sort of 15 minutes of talking and then 15 minutes of questions afterwards. It all goes very, very quickly. So expect that to be the case, and therefore have your questions at the ready as soon as Nicholas has finished speaking. There will be roving mics, so I'll be over here running around. There'll be other people there, and we will prod you to make sure you ask those questions. There's also, you'll see on your chair a little card telling you how to make comments. You can do that in two ways. Through Twitter, using the hashtag OECD4. This is room 4, so it's OECD4. And also Wissembly. Now, those comments will, as I told the audience last time, be presented on the board behind us as Nicholas finishes speaking. So if you don't like the talk, it's not a feedback form. Don't put it on there. It will appear behind you or appear behind Nicholas, and it'll be maybe slightly embarrassing because your name will be appended to it. Nicholas Hahn has an incredibly full biography. I don't think, I've honestly never read such a thing, and I've read a lot of these things. He's the Vice President of Impact and on the faculty of the Singularity University. His issues of focus, he says, have included disaster relief, food security, environment, energy, public health, education, genetics, and information systems. And usually when someone says something like that, they mean they literally have a passing interest in these things. I think Nicholas actually has degrees in all of those fields. And we're not talking just like menial BAs here. We're talking masters and PhDs. He worked as a science teacher in a Kenyan village with a Peace Corps. He's worked for the UN. He's also the creator of an international standard for classifying the severity of food insecurity and disasters. NASA gave him a research fellowship just because he's brilliant. And he's an avid, to top it all off, avid sea kayaker and explorer, and completed 500-kilometer expedition across Lake Victoria, just like probably for breakfast, I assume. Give a warm round of applause for Nicholas. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for that introduction. If there was any breakfast being eaten on that kayak trip, it was going to be me being eaten by crocodiles. My name is Nicholas Hahn. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the organizers for your flexibility, because my flight arrived late and traffic getting from the airport, et cetera, et cetera. I come to you from Silicon Valley, a place called Singularity University. We're based in the NASA Ames Research Center, and we have this grand mission of educating, empowering, and inspiring leaders like yourselves to leverage exponential technologies, and I'll talk about what that is, to solve the world's biggest problems. And we work with uncommon partnerships of corporations and thought leaders and entrepreneurs and government officials and investors to make that happen. So the title of my talk today is Exponential Disruption, which on the face of it sounds a bit nerve-wracking. And the question is, when we talk about exponential disruption, is that going to be for the good or for the not so good? Because clearly, when you look at all the indicators, we are headed towards a massive disruption of all things in industry, in social services, and one could argue humanity itself. And this is not some far-off science fiction vision. This is in the next few decades. So if you're feeling a rapid pace of change now, that pace of change is just going to accelerate. So the question is that for the good or the bad? Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, just a few weeks ago made his statement on this matter. He said, the next few decades are going to feel a lot more pain than happiness. And that's very worrisome coming from a person like Jack Ma, who has his sights on technology. So what I'm going to do now is talk about our worldview at Singularity University with exponential technology and some of the drivers behind this disruption that we referred to. The first thing to get our head around is this concept of exponentials. You might have heard of Moore's Law. 1970, founder of Intel, Gordon Moore, notices that basically every 2 years they're able to double the number of integrated circuits, thus doubling the computing power. And he plotted that out on a logarithmic curve, and he realized the power of computing. Then comes along Ray Kurzweil, one of the founders of Singularity University, and he says, actually, that's not just about the paradigm of integrated circuits. This has been following a pattern of information consolidation and price performance since early 1900s and even beyond. And furthermore, we have no reason to believe it's going to stop. That's the exponential growth in computing. And then Ray Kurzweil took that one step further, and he said, that applies to any technology which becomes an information-based technology. Any technology which becomes an information-based technology is subject to what Ray Kurzweil calls the law of accelerating returns. So, exponentials. And to get our heads around what that means, think 1975, the Cray 1 supercomputer, about the size of this room, cost over $8 million, had a whopping 80 million floating operations per second. This last year, 2016, the size of a credit card, out comes the X drive, and it is less than $1,000, and it works at 24 trillion floating operations per second. So the price performance of computing is following this incredible curve down, and it doesn't stop. There's some argument as to whether or not Moore's law would end. Well, quantum computing, cloud-based computing, gives us whole new paradigms for computing going forward. So we see this with artificial intelligence. Basically, any technology which becomes an information-based technology is subject to the law of accelerating returns. Artificial intelligence and robotics. You have AI in your phone right now. AI is being used to manage the city of Florida's water systems. If you look at AI as being now a board member in a corporation in Japan, AI will increasingly be used for making government policy. And in fact, one could argue that based on the recent Trump policy on the Paris Agreement, AI can't come fast enough in that regard. Robotics, we see robotics happening. Robotics are flying drones. The concept of where's my flying car is no longer a concept. There are real prototypes out there. Digital biology, basically, like I said, any technology which is information-based. Think your genetic code, ACGT, being a code just like a computer code to be designed and manipulated. And this is following the exponential downward trend. So when the human genome was first decoded, around the year 2000, $100 million to decode the human genome. Right now, any one of us can go online and order a version, or at least some limited version of decoding your genome for on the order of $200. And it doesn't stop there. It'll continue to go down, 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 and be pennies on the dollar. So you'll do it routinely to check your health. And other technologies such as CRISPR to cut out and replace a part of your genetic code creates whole new opportunities for us to design for agriculture, design for healthcare, etc. The question is, how can this technology be used to solve the world's biggest challenges? And we see evidence of this already, whether it be the price of solar following exponential downward trends and around the world already reaching price parity of non-renewable fuels. And the difference is solar will continue to go down in price because it's following exponential trends. Our non-renewables will not. We see it in food. Meat is an incredibly inefficient way to get our protein. And with the increased number of population and with people changing their diets, the inefficiencies of that meat on our environment and on our well-being of animals, et cetera, will just exponentially grow. Well, there's alternatives coming about as well. Mark Post from Maastricht University has developed what was 5 years ago called the $300,000 hamburger. Basically taking live tissue from an animal without killing it and propagating its cells in a sterile laboratory environment. That $300,000 hamburger 5 years ago now costs them on the order of $10 and going down. And the question is, would you eat that as a consumer when it reaches your supermarket? And for me, this is a good example of how technology actually will change our cultural norms. We see it with water. And just last month or the month before, a new organic structure, a new molecular structure called a metal organic framework, which is specifically designed to absorb water molecules from our atmosphere. And they can do that passively. And then use solar energy to vaporize it and then condense it so you can get water at your house with no pipes coming in. There's a whole new paradigm for how we get our water. Corruption is a huge global grand challenge that, in fact, one could argue, lest we solve that, we're swimming upstream. Corruption is going to be tackled by technologies like blockchain, which is riding the exponential computing trend. For me, this question, as I approach this question of, is the coming exponential disruption going to be painful or not painful? Is it going to be uplifting for humanity or cause massive social disruption? I like to think of that with a framework of abundance drivers and abundance deniers. So abundance is this concept of creating abundance and solving all of our global grand challenges. Abundance drivers would include the exponential technology trends that I mentioned. It includes the convergence of those technologies. So think nanotechnology with 3D printing, converging and being able to create new opportunities for innovation. It also includes this notion that we are increasingly able to design with the basic fundamental units of matter at the atomic level. We see that with CRISPR, or molecular or atomic level. We see that with CRISPR, we see that with that moth that I just mentioned. And we're increasingly able to design a world that we want, that we desire. Another driver of abundance is treating our planet as the global unit of analysis. When Carl Sagan, using the Voyager imagery, looking back on planet Earth, and he said that pale blue dot, humanity's mind starts to shift, and it has increasingly is shifting, treating our planet as a single unit of analysis. And then there's this issue of global empathy. And I know there's a discussion about whether or not technology itself reduces or enhances empathy. And I would like to think that technology has incredible potential to increase empathy. And then there are the abundance deniers. What will keep us from getting to that point of achieving abundance and doing it in the least amount of social disruption as possible? Well, not least of which, and I know it's a topic here, is technological unemployment. The very technologies that we're talking about, artificial intelligence and robotics, are the very technologies which are posing existential threats to our social systems right now. So I'm sure you know the studies from the ILO and the Oxford Martin School. In the next couple of decades, we can expect 50% of all job titles that exist now will not exist. And the question is, what happens? Will new jobs be created? And some would argue that we can't even imagine what the new jobs will be. Or, will humans simply be replaced in the workforce? And what does that mean? I know there's a discussion on basic minimum income. And funny enough, both ends of the political economic spectrum converge and they agree on that concept. And then there's an issue of policy. Policy, by definition, has been reactive to these exponentially changing technologies. The technologies will continue to grow exponentially. Policy happens incrementally and sometimes linearly and reacts. We need to create a new policy environment where we are anticipating the power of these technologies and creating policy environments for that. Issues of inequality and inclusion also will keep us from achieving abundance. So at Singularity University, our approach is we do convene business people, government officials, entrepreneurs, investors, thought leaders, and we create uncommon partnerships with these groups. We do educational programs, we do startup labs, we do innovation workshops and the like. We have a global community of people around the world, and probably more than anything else, we're trying to activate the other fundamental unit of our humanity, and that is each one of us as humans. We truly have now, with exponential technology, the power of individuals and small teams of people to create innovations which can have global impact, for positive or not for positive. And we're trying to work with individuals, teams of people, and organizations to realize that potential. Thank you.
So it's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. So we've got time for questions. I'm going to ask one first. I know we've already got hands up, so apologies. But look, can you just go over that bit again? Because there is this debate raging at the moment between the sort of techno-optimists like yourself. I don't know whether you classify yourself as an out-and-out techno-optimist.
Techno-criticalist.
Oh, ooh, okay, that's a new one. And then those sort of economists like, say, Robert Gordon, Larry Summers, who are like, well, hang on, how do the proceeds of that get shared, A, and B, actually, we're seeing exponential growth in technology and what it could deliver, but actually we're not seeing exponential growth in living standards, right? How do you see that bridge getting divide getting bridged?
In fact, I think of that as the abundance paradox. The paradox being, on one hand, even today, we have such inequality with some people having ridiculous amounts of resources in abundance and others being left way behind. My nighttime job, I'm still involved with that food security system that I created, and I'm on a 4-person committee that determines whether or not a place is in famine. And literally today, at the end of the day, today I'm on a phone call to determine whether or not South Sudan is still in a famine. So at the same time as I interact with people with incredible abundance, I also interact with people who literally are starving to death. That's an abundance paradox. And that system in and of itself is unstable. We can't go forward and create an abundance unless we do it in an inclusive way for all. So if that means a more aggressive distribution of resources and income, if it means a radical change in our economy so that basic minimum income becomes part of a birthright, then these might be the directions we're going.
Got a question over here from that gentleman. And if you just give your name and then just before you ask your question, that'd be great. Thank you.
I'm Jeff Lebowitz. How are you?
Hi.
Question about the definition of disruption as you use it. You're not using it in the classic Christensen approach. It seems more like global change is what you call it, disruption. Can you expand on your notion of disruption?
So I'm specifically not referring to it necessarily as negative. I'm referring to it as a radical change in the systems that we have at hand. So corporations get disrupted. So Kodak gets disrupted by the very technology they created, the digital camera. Society gets disrupted. Society is getting disrupted through massive changes in labor force. So I'm referring to it in terms of radical changes in our system, not necessarily positive or negative. I'm trying to hold the value statement neutral, whereas Jack Ma says it's going to be negative.
Hello, my name is Sasha Lanoka. Thank you very much for your talk. So this talk was on exponential disruption, and you talked quite a bit on it. But one thing that you did not mention, and that really characterizes for me Ray Kurzweil, is transhumanism. So I'd be very interested to hear more on it, hear your views, if you believe in it. I have 2 more questions. Second one is, so you talked about how to collaborate with policymakers, and one really interesting tendency that we see with technological education, whether it is with Singularity University or with, like, I don't know, a coding school called École 42 here in France, is that there are private initiatives. And so I really wonder how policymakers, but also on your part, how can you help public education top, or like go as fast as the technological changes and education which goes with it? And if you have already collaborated on it.
Let's keep it to 2 questions. What was the first question? You said transhumanism.
Transhumanism and transhumanism and the position of Ray Kurzweil on it.
Okay. Do you know what that means?
I know what that means.
Okay, and you're going to explain that.
She and
I don't know what that means. She knows what it means.
However, let me be clear at the outset before I even speak to this. Singularity University is actually not about transhumanism. So we specifically protect that space. We're very much about the next few decades. Ray Kurzweil, just to note, puts the year 2045 as the year when the singularity we will start to feel the singularity.
You want to just explain so we're not leaving anyone behind?
Singularity is basically when computing power continues to grow at these accelerating rates. So think about what we have right now, doubling every year up until 2045. And all of the other information-based technologies which are also doubling. It's almost unimaginable what's going to happen in the year 2045. So that's the year when Ray Kurzweil and others, as far as the technical singularity is concerned, is when change is happening so rapidly, humans can't even fathom what is beyond. That's the notion of the singularity. So transhumanism. Singularity University is not about transhumanism, but my own thoughts on it, it's going to happen. So we're already cyborging up. People are putting chips in their hands. Elon Musk already announced his effort to put a neural mesh on your brain so you can communicate with computers. The phone in his hand right now will be in his body soon enough. So we're cyborging up. The question that I have, what disturbs me about this, is will it actually mean a bifurcation of humanity? People who do not have access to technology and those who do. Because one thing we do know is technology amplifies differences that we have. So if we really care about Homo sapiens, we need to design the future in an extremely inclusive way to bring people along.
There was a second question about private institutions and education.
And my short answer on that is invest in public institutions. And not only that, but invest in technology to make education accessible and more meaningful on a personalized level for people around the world.
Okay, my name is Marko Grobelnik. I'm head of AI lab of roughly 50 people, and I'm working also on complexity science, right, which is all about exponential technologies. Now, the key question really is not just to observe and be afraid or excited, right, but to control this, right? So exponential technologies is not something which happened just now. So it's a basic principle of nature, tipping points of all kinds, right? So control, evolve the nature, and so on. So this is something which is forever. Universe functions like this, right? So we are just got recently excited because we can observe things, right? Like measure society, and we observe these exponential effects also in a society, as you explained, right? Now, and complexity science is an area where, let's say, physicists, sociologists, biologists, and so on meet and control and try to model and operate with this. Now, my question for you would be how you at your university are dealing with this, controlling these processes, observing. So basically, you need to either accelerate or stop certain processes when you want to have effect, either in society, nature, systems, and so on. So the question is how you deal with this in a technical, operational way, right?
You answered the fundamental aspect of this question already, and that these exponential trends are a fundamental force of nature. Ray Kurzweil would argue that this has been happening ever since the Big Bang and when subatomic particles formed around atoms and information consolidation around molecules and da-da-da-da-da. This is a fundamental force of nature. And the point is, and this is really a mindset shift that really we try and encourage people to embrace, and that is that there is no man behind the curtain speeding up or slowing down this exponential technology. This is a force in and of itself. The question is, can we guide it towards good or not? To what degree do we have control over that? So as far as AI is concerned, you know the OpenAI initiative, which is one effort to create an artificial intelligence which is actually services the needs of humanity. The interesting observation there is the prime people behind that are all people from the Silicon Valley tech companies. So whoever codes it, as you well know, actually manifests its reality. Which means that the very development of artificial intelligence needs to have inclusive coders in it, in themselves, and be intentionally involving philosophers, people of different ethnic groups, of different age groups, different geographies, to design truly an open AI. And so far, we're not there.
We've got a question? Oh, yeah, there's lots of them. Put your hands up, just so I know how many questions we've got. Got 1, 2, okay, and I've got like 4 questions myself if you don't get in there. The lady over here, yeah.
Yes, my name is Valerie. I work in a non-profit organization. Just following up on what you were saying, I'm interested in what you're saying about are we coding inclusivity and diversity?
Yeah.
Along the same lines, are we also coding, if don't know if the term is appropriate, or anticipating governance and counter power of that force that I understand we're not going to be able to stop. Are we already thinking about how we're going to counterbalance that power that is apparently unleashed?
Well, people are working on new governance structures right now. There's a concept of fluid democracy, whereby each member of the citizenry is given a vote on a issue, and that member of the citizenry, using blockchain, can allocate his or her vote to somebody who he or she trusts, thinks they know that better. And then that person can then, other people can give their vote to her. I'll give it to her. Other people might give her vote, and then she can give her vote, that collection of votes, to someone else as well, who she thinks better represents them. That's one version of governance which is completely different from what we have right now, where you elect a representative, and that representative somehow is supposed to represent you on all issues for the next 4 years. And we know what happens. They do crazy trade negotiations. So there are manifestations of that right now.
One question from me is, unless we have anything else from the audience. Yeah, we've got a lady over there. Oh, the third question, yeah. Just, you mentioned blockchain and how that would solve corruption. Could you just explain that for the audience, what that means, and to me?
Well, it won't, like a panacea, just solve it overnight, for sure. But blockchain transactions become more direct from supplier to service provider without the middleman in between. And right now, a lot of corruption happens in that murky space where a gatekeeper receives the money and then allocates funds. Well, we don't need that anymore. We don't need it through banks. We don't need it through government coffers. We can provide money directly to service providers and cut that out. And transactions can become more accountable and more transparent as well.
At the same time, blockchain is also...
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Yes, but in the for public finances, one would assume that's not going to happen by mafia. But the very in fact, what he's pointing out is any technology, whether it be from the origination of fire itself, can be used to burn down a village or can cook your meat. And blockchain can be used for good and not so good. And that applies to any one of these technologies.
Actually, the interesting thing about the ransomware thing that happened, if you were talking about sort of using the mafia, was that they asked for all this Bitcoin. And it's not that they were anonymous. They actually had an address you had to send the Bitcoin to, and you can track the address and you can see it. You see the money moving from place to place to place. You know where it's going, which with real cash, obviously, you can't do. I think we've got time for one other question from the lady lady in blue versus man in, no? Are you sure? She's had two. Yeah, go on, give it over. Yeah, okay, good.
Thanks. My question is just about ethics and moral first. Another way I will use an old French way, which is science sans conscience n'est que ruine de l'âme. By English, it would say science with any conscience. But it's the same in English. It just destroy people. So,
could you say that in English again, please?
Science sans conscience. How do you spell it?
Science without consciousness.
Science, yeah.
Without conscience.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Got it. I got it. As these technologies grow in their exponential power, we need our sense of ethics to grow exponentially as well. The problem is the disconnect that we have is these technologies will continue to go at exponential rates, whether you like it or not. It will happen. What we don't know will happen is if our sense of ethics and empathy will also increase in our policy. And this is probably one of the greatest disconnects and challenges of our time, is to anticipate where things are going and design for that. Whether or not humanity can keep up with pace, and maybe that's why folks like Jack Ma say that the next few decades are going to be more pain than happiness. Maybe that's what he's sussing out there. I'd like to think not. I'd like to think we actually can anticipate forums like this forum, gets people together, policy leaders and technologists and whatnot, to get together and what can you do to design in an inclusive way, design in a way that brings people along in this abundance journey.
Thank you very much. If we could all thank Nicholas, and thank you for being such a wonderful audience.
Thank you, Ron.
The phrase to beat clearly is cyborging up. So we also have another talk coming up. It's Christopher Lehane from Airbnb. It should be in the program, the details. So enjoy, and thank you very much. Thank you again.
Hello.